the jury?
Yes.
Jurors enter the courtroom, Your Honor. Jurors may be seated. Jurors seated and accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming back. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? All right, excellent. We'll get started directly. You want to call Mr. Turner back in? All right, Mr. Turner, I'll remind you that you're still under oath. Okay, still under oath. Thank you. Go ahead. Oh.
Jury is out.
Okay, I'm putting the, yes, off the record.
Jurors enter the courtroom, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Jurors may be seated.
Very good. Thank you again. Just did a little practice run there and make sure you were all awake after lunch. So, all right, we're ready to begin again. And I did remind Mr. Turner that he's still under oath. Mr. Escobar?
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, please report, counsel. Good afternoon, Mr. Turner.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Turner, you're retired,
I am.
and how old were you back in January of 2014?
59.
59. Okay. You went with your wife to the Cobb Theater, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I believe you indicated on direct examination that when you first went in, the previews were already playing.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so you walked up the stairs with your wife, and you all took a seat at the very top row, which I'm just going to call it row A for identification purposes, okay?
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
That's
And
correct.
so if this is the, I'm going to use this as a screen. So if this is the screen, you were all the way to the right on row A. You were seated at the very last seat.
Correct.
Of row A.
Facing the screen.
Facing the screen,
On the
just think
right.
that's a theater screen right there.
Yes, sir.
And your wife would be to your left.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you normally like to sit, obviously, at the end, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So that you can go to the bathroom whenever you need to?
It's more to be able to stretch my legs, but yes.
Okay, I know that you've had some, I guess, problems with your legs in the past, is
Yes.
that the issue?
Yes, sir.
And were you using a cane back then or not?
Intermittently, I did.
I know you had fallen quite a few times,
Yes, sir.
and sometimes you were in need of a cane and
Yes, sir.
and sometimes not, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so you just don't recall whether that day you had a cane?
I'm pretty sure I did not.
Okay, now, when you went into the previews, since they were already playing, they were loud.
Yes, sir.
And when we say loud, that's the word that you've always been using in your testimony, correct?
As I recall, yes.
You haven't been using historically the word dim. You've been using loud, right? Or low. You've always said loud.
For the vocal, yes.
For the vocal.
Yes.
For the previews being loud.
Yes.
And you've always used the word dark in reference to the lighting.
No, sir, I don't believe that's correct.
You want to 2486, lines 22 through 25. Okay.
You can also do 24/7 lines 18 through 22.
Yep, we're going to talk about all that here. Now, you would agree that you've used the word darker, right?
I've used dark, I've used dim, darker, yes, sir.
Okay, and so let's talk a little bit about what that means. This is not the first time you've been to a theater, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and there's a reason why the theater turns down the lights, correct?
Yes.
It's for the experience, right?
Sure.
Okay, so one of the reasons why in previews they're loud, for the experience, right?
Well, that and for commercials, they're trying to get your attention. even
Forget about the
further.
commercial, I'm talking about the previews,
Right.
the previews of the movies.
Right.
They're loud because they want to get your attention to go see RoboCop and Terminator and those types of things, correct?
Okay, yes.
And you remember that on that particular day, that's exactly what the previews were. RoboCop, Terminator, they were action-packed, shoot-'em-up type of previews.
Right.
And they were loud.
Yes.
Now, when you first sit down, your wife is to your left.
Correct.
She's seated, you're seated. And the first thing that you notice is that you notice that there's a man standing up, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Reeves is not in his seat, correct?
Correct.
And you notice this man standing up with a phone in his hand, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he's kind of seated, where Mr. Reeves would be seated, but one row below. He's standing up,
Yes.
right? And not only is he standing up, but this tall man, right?
He was tall.
It was a guy that you later came to know as Mr. Oulson, That's your recollection, right?
Yes, sir.
And he was actually facing you.
Yes.
So he would have been facing you, right? You were right. So you got a good look at his face, your recollection is.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And he was just standing up in the middle of the theater while the previews were going. You found that a little bit odd, right?
Yes, sir.
Because you certainly wouldn't have been standing up in the middle of the theater with people behind you while the previews were going, right?
I would not have.
Well, did you see who was behind Mr. Oulson as he was just standing up in the middle of the theater?
You're asking me, did I see?
Yeah, did you see who was behind Mr. Oulson?
In my row?
Yes,
Yes. At that time, no one.
no one. So those seats were all empty?
No. I thought you're behind him. That seat was empty. The rest in the row, of course, was occupied, if that's what you're...
So the one seat right behind him was empty, but what about the seat, if I'm in that back row, right? And he is here, in the lower row. Was there an empty seat here? You know where Mr. Reeves was sitting, right?
No.
Was there someone sitting here?
Yes,
Who?
his wife.
So he would have been standing up in front of his wife when you first came in. Mr. Oulson facing you with a phone in his hand.
Yes, sir.
And that's what you saw and that's what you recollect.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Reeves was nowhere near there yet.
No, sir.
And so you're seated and you're seeing Mr. Oulson standing up, presumably in front of Mr. Reeves' wife.
Yes, sir.
And he's just standing there playing with his phone.
I don't know what he was doing with his phone, but he had his phone in his hand.
And he's facing in your direction.
Yes, sir.
And according to your recollection, he is there for quite some time
Yes, sir.
while the previews are playing.
Yes, sir.
And then, after some time passes, your recollection is that you see Mr. Reeves walking up the stairs. Correct?
Correct.
And they're the stairs that actually lead right to your seat,
That's correct.
right at the far right.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You also had noticed by that point in time that you thought that there was about 70 to 75 people in the theater, correct?
That was a guesstimate, yes.
And you noticed that Mr. Oulson had this phone that was dark in color, black.
Yes, sir.
And so as Mr. Reeves comes up to you, you're seeing him, right? Pretty close to you, he's walking up.
Yes, sir.
You see Mr. Reeves and you see him walking, and he's wearing, according to your recollection, a loose London Fog waist-high jacket, light-colored tan.
I think I said a light waist jacket, similar to what a London Fog would be, or an old members-only jacket or something of that nature, but it was
Long sleeves, jacket, kind of a tan area, right?
light-colored, I
Yeah,
think I
and
said.
so you saw, well, I think you said tan, right?
I think I said light-colored or tan.
Or tan, okay. And so that's what you see Mr. Reeves actually walking up the stairs wearing.
Well, to be more clear, I saw him as he approached my aisle. So it wasn't as if I was looking at him as he was walking up. He was pretty much in my face.
So
at
even
that
better,
point.
you
Well,
even got a better view of the London Fog type jacket.
well, I wouldn't say that. I would say because he was so close, I was staring basically at his midsection. So I wasn't, it wasn't as if I was seeing him in full stature.
Well, you saw the long sleeves, right?
I saw the waist jacket, or the waist,
So you mean to tell me he was right in front of you and you didn't see anything but his waist?
I saw a cross-section of his midsection as he was coming up.
Well, didn't you see him as he was walking up?
Once he approached me,
Okay. And what he told you at that point in time, as he approached you, is he said, sir, excuse me, I'm gonna try to get
Well, he said, excuse me.
polite, right?
Yeah, polite.
Politely?
Politely.
Okay, it certainly didn't appear to you to be grumpy.
No, no.
And as he's scooting by, you're able to see more of his person, right?
No, not really.
Oh, really? So he's walking down the aisle, and you're not able to see his person. You're not able to see his back. You're not able to see his sleeves. You're not able to see any of that.
No, what I'm telling you is when he approached, said, excuse me, I turned away from him, facing away. He walked by me.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. I thought you just told the jury during direct examination that you turned in the direction of his seat. to
That's
let
what
him by.
that's what I just said.
Okay, and so then he's
Okay,
passing
I
by.
turned, and then he was behind me, so he walked past, and he walked on down to his seat,
So if you're
passing
turned,
on my right.
so if you're turned in that direction, you're seeing him as he goes to his seat, right?
Yes.
And you're able to see his full body, right?
At that point, I could see most of it, yes.
And you saw that London fog type jacket with long sleeves.
Actually,
Right.
I don't recall that I ever said he had long sleeves, but I did say it was a waist type of jacket or, yeah, I think I said a waist type.
Okay. Now, you see him actually walk to his seat, grab the bag of popcorn from his wife and sit down.
Yes.
And certainly you wouldn't think that someone that's going to his seat to grab a bag of popcorn is ready to get into a fight with anybody, right?
Speculation, or just speculation.
We'll
Sustained.
withdraw. And while all this is happening, you're saying that Mr. Oulson is still standing up. He's still standing up right there in the theater. Nobody else is standing up, right?
Correct.
He's the only one in the theater, according to your recollection, that is standing up.
Correct.
Objection, asked and answered.
Sustained.
And as Mr. Reeves is getting close to his seat, that's when you first hear Mr. Oulson speak, correct?
He had already sat down, and there was a communication between them, and that's when I heard Mr. Oulson say, well, what he said.
You remember having a hearing here, Mr. Turner, and it was back in 2017. And you remember the following question and answer. It's on page 2494, lines 1 through 6. Remember the following question. Is it at this moment, somewhere around this moment, after Mr. Reeves had gotten close to his seat, that you first hear a voice, correct? You said yes. A voice, one voice? You said Mr. Oulson's voice. Question, and the previews were on? Yes. And the previews were loud? Yes. So before that Mr. Reeves got to his seat and sat down, as he got close, you heard Mr. Oulson speak, correct?
I don't know that it was before he sat down.
Well, you would agree that your recollection would be much better in 2017 than it is in 2022, correct?
Well, perhaps, but I guess I would ask the question is,
Well, we can't have, witnesses can't ask questions, I'm sorry, Mr. Turner.
Unfortunately.
But you can certainly give me many answers, okay? And I'll try to follow up
Yeah.
with you with some of those, okay? So you would agree, would you not, okay, that your recollection would be better in 2017 than it is in 22, especially since you were under oath in 2017?
I'm not, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure how,
You took it seriously in 2017, did
as
you not?
I do now.
Okay, and so would your recollection be better in 2017 than 2022 or not?
Well, it most likely would.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Now, you're still looking around, right? You're still seeing, you have your focus on Mr. Oulson, who's still standing up, correct?
Correct.
And this is when Mr. Oulson starts to exchange his loud voices towards Mr. Reeves, correct?
I'm sorry, say that again?
That's when he starts yelling at Mr. Reeves, Mr. Oulson.
I didn't hear him yelling at Mr. Reeves.
Well, let me ask you a question. Back in 2014, January, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, were you hard of hearing back then?
No, I wasn't hard of hearing.
Okay. The previews were allowed, correct?
They were the same level as they were in 2015 or 2017.
Yeah, they don't change.
Right.
The loudness it was there, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it was an action-packed type of preview, as
Yes.
we've talked
Objection,
before.
Your Honor, asked and answered.
Sustained.
Now, you say, because Mr. Oulson was looking at you, right? And you say that now Mr. Oulson squares up. Now he's looking straight at Mr. Reeves, right?
He turns to his right. Yes,
He turns towards Mr. Reeves.
that's correct.
He squares off to Mr. Reeves's chair.
Okay,
That's your recollection, correct?
yes.
And you would agree at that point in time, Mr. Oulson was pissed.
Yes, he was agitated, he was pissed, he was
Well,
frustrated.
Let's
I mean,
focus on,
well,
first of all, the word of pissed. That's what the word you used, right?
Yes, I've used all of those words.
However, your definition of pissed is not anger. That's what you're telling the ladies and gentlemen of the jury here, that if someone is pissed, they're not angry. Is that your understanding?
It can be. It can be frustration, it can be irritation, it can be a lot of things, but
And it can be anger, right?
well, your body language is trying to suggest something, what I would perceive to be way beyond.
Well, we're gonna
Yes.
get to body language because that's coming up next.
Okay.
Okay? But it could be anger, right?
Yes.
Is that hard to say?
If,
Objection, Your Honor.
you know, if this is going to be about you and I, then it's, you know, I'm not sure how that's helpful.
Well, let me ask you.
Overruled.
After you're seeing Mr. Oulson pissed, you decide, I'm going to get up. You're going to stand up, right? You decide to get up out of your seat, correct? You felt the need at that point in time to get out of your seat. Am I right?
Yes, I got out of my seat.
And you stayed standing, right?
Yes.
And as Mr. Oulson is making his statement while pissed, he's moving closer to Mr. Reeves. Correct? Closer to Mr. Reeves. Is that correct?
He turned toward Mr. Reeves, that's correct.
Is he getting closer to Mr. Reeves?
Not at that point.
Page 2499, lines 5 through 11. Question. Same hearing, 2017. Remember being placed under oath? Do you remember being placed under oath?
Yes.
Okay. Question. You realize that after Mr. Oulson is making that statement, he's moving closer to Mr. Reeves, correct? Answer, yes. So now, not only is his voice elevated, he is now moving closer to Mr. Reeves. Your answer. Yeah, he's leaning towards Mr. Reeves, perhaps a 10 to 15 degree angle.
That's correct.
Question. You don't know whether his seat, meaning Mr. Oulson's seat, bottom, is up or down. You said, I don't.
I don't.
So you would agree here today he's getting closer, and there's an angle now in the getting closer, meaning that Mr. Oulson's body is now moving in an angle towards Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
In other words, leaning towards Mr. Reeves.
The difference between what I'm saying and the way you're couching it is I've taken it in segments. He made the turn. Once he made the turn, he leaned forward. I had expected that you were going to come back with that part and ask, and I would say yes, he
Well, you
leaned
just
forward.
got it out for us. He leaned forward, right?
Right, that's,
Okay. And you're thinking that Mr. Reeves is going to get punched?
no, sir.
$24.99. You remember that same hearing in 2017?
I remember the entire exchange.
Remember the following questions and answer. Question. So in your mind, for the first time, you're thinking Mr. Reeves could get punched. Answer. Yeah, I'm thinking that did cross my mind.
Well,
Well, let me ask you a question.
Your Honor, I'd ask the
well,
witness to be permitted to finish his answer.
he is, I'm going to let him, but I got to make sure that that's what he said. That's what you said, right?
I don't believe that that's all that I said.
Oh, no,
I think
we're
there's
gonna-
context there.
Okay, well, would you like to read the other couple of sentences after?
Well, Your Honor, I think instead of doing that, I mean, the witness can explain what his answer is.
What is your answer, sir?
Ask me the question again, please.
Okay, that you thought at that moment that Mr. Reeves could possibly get punched?
I think I testified that I was paying closer attention because I thought that this could develop into something further. Initially, I didn't.
So you never said what I've
Let him
just...
finish his answer, please.
Initially, I didn't know if the exchange between them was because they knew each other. I didn't know if they were together. I didn't know. It was only at the point where it appeared to get more heightened that I thought something could happen here. I never expected what happened to have been actually what happened, but I certainly paid attention because there was obvious tension between the two.
Well, you hadn't heard Mr. Reeves say a peep. Up until that point, you had not heard Mr. Reeves say a peep. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
So how could Mr. Reeves be guilty of anything if he hasn't said a peep?
I wasn't judging either person.
The
I
only
couldn't.
one that you heard was Mr. Oulson, correct?
That's correct.
And the only one that was leaning towards Mr. Reeves was Mr. Oulson.
Yes.
And Mr. Reeves was there quietly, not saying a peep.
Well, I didn't say that either. I said I didn't hear him say anything.
Okay,
So he could have said a lot, but I
Yeah.
didn't hear it.
you didn't hear it. But you certainly heard Mr. Oulson. That was not a problem.
I heard Mr. Oulson.
But you do see Mr. Reeves doing something important here, right? You saw Mr. Reeves trying to create some distance from Mr. Oulson as he was leaning sideways. That you saw.
I don't recall that.
2,500, 7 through 13.
Is it 2,500, 7 through 13?
Yep, it's going to the next page.
I don't see that. We looking at the same thing?
Yeah. let me phrase it this way. At that moment, you're seeing now Mr. Oulson's hands reaching towards Mr. Reeves, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so tell me how Mr. Reeves's body is positioned. As Mr. Oulson is reaching now into Mr. Reeves's space, you would agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell me how Mr. Reeves was positioned, his body.
He was sitting back in his chair.
Okay, meaning, those chairs have some mobility, right? Not much in that back
Not
row
much
because
in
you
there.
have a wall, right?
Correct.
But it has a tiny bit, right?
Right.
And so you can pull back a tiny bit,
Right.
correct? And that's what you saw.
Well, I don't know that I saw that. It's possible, but I don't know that I saw it because the chairs go back a couple of inches. I don't know that I could determine.
But clearly, at that point in time, Mr. Oulson, as he's reaching over, is into Mr. Reeves's space,
Yes, sir.
correct?
That's correct.
And the theater's still dark, correct?
The theater was dimmed and dark. It
And
was,
the previews are still playing loud.
yes.
And as you see those arms of Mr. Oulson's coming towards Mr. Reeves, that's when you hear the gun go off, right?
No, sir.
You didn't,
His arm came across and grabbed the popcorn.
right?
He pulls the popcorn back and then flicks it.
Okay.
That's,
So, other than that movement, going with his arm towards Mr. Reeves,
yes.
and then grabbing the popcorn, you're telling this jury you didn't see Mr. Oulson previous to that, maybe 8-10 seconds beforehand, trying to go over the seat, the back of the seat. You didn't see him leaning over the back of the seat then. I'm talking about 8 to 10 seconds before. You didn't see that.
I didn't see that. The leaning over of Mr. Oulson was everything to do with him leaning forward to grab the popcorn.
So, the gun goes off, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You're still standing.
Yes, sir.
And by this time, Mr. Oulson, according to your recollection, must have been standing for quite some time, because he never sat down, right? He was up there standing up,
Correct.
right before Mr. Reeves came, while Mr. Reeves was going down the aisle, the whole bit.
Objection, this has been asked and answered several times.
Sustained.
You indicated to the members of the jury that you saw Mrs. Oulson's hand on her husband's chest, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you believe that Mr. Oulson's hands were down at his side when he was shot? Yes or no?
No.
So tell me exactly where you believe Mr. Oulson's hands were at the time that Mrs. Oulson had her hand on his chest.
What I recall was when he threw the popcorn, his hands came back, to here, and then his wife's hand was already up. So it came to here, her hand would have been behind his, and then the gun rings out and his hands fall.
So his hands fall after.
That's correct.
You didn't see anything in his hands, right?
No, not at that point.
In either hand, because you had a view of both hands.
Well, initially he had a cell phone in his left hand.
That was when he was standing up,
Right,
right?
that's
Okay.
correct.
And so now his hands are down to his sides, right?
They fell to his side.
Okay. And I think you've already testified that at that point in time, Mr. Oulson made that statement and then collapsed, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I think you also testified that you had some contact with Mrs. Oulson, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
In assisting her on various aspects, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you then decide to go, I believe you testified on direct that you went into the theater, to a section of the theater where there were people milling around. And you think maybe as many as 40, 50, 60 people in that area of the theater.
Yes.
And you went to that area, and in that particular area, people were talking about what happened.
People were talking. Yes, I can't say specifically. Some probably were, but I don't recall. If you asked me what they were saying, I couldn't tell you.
You can't tell me today in 2022.
I probably couldn't have told you in 2015 or 17. But
Well, while you were there with those 50, 60 people, did you have any police officer that you remember coming up to you all as a group and saying, do not talk to anybody about what you saw?
I do not recall that.
Do you recall any police officer coming forward and saying, hey, all of these 60, we're going to separate and we're going to put you in a row and you're going to have 4 empty seats in between all of you and don't talk?
No, sir.
And so you were there for quite a long time, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were concerned because things seemed very disorganized in that theater as far as law enforcement was concerned.
That was a personal opinion, yes.
In fact, they hadn't even given you the voluntary statement forms. You had to go find some officer to go hunt something down so that you could write and the others could write a statement, right?
Well, there was this officer there that apparently had brought some forms in, but he didn't pass them out, and people were having to go to him to ask for the forms so they could write them up.
Okay. And so you do that.
I do that.
And then you go to a concession area, which is outside of Theater 10, correct?
Yes.
And there's a bunch of people there at that concession area, right? And tables and what have you. And those people were talking about amongst themselves, correct?
There was talk. Again, I couldn't tell you what the subject of the...
Well, they were
conversation.
talking about what had occurred, correct?
I couldn't say that.
At least that was your assumption.
I'd object.
I'm not sure.
The assumption, we shouldn't be talking about assumptions.
Now, how many people would you say were there in that concession area?
Honestly, I don't recall.
Quite a few.
Quite a few.
Okay, and you were in that group.
It's true.
And so you were there for some time, right?
We weren't there, I'm going to say 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, and then you're taken to another room, is that correct?
That's correct.
And in that particular room, again, people are talking about what just happened.
Again, I couldn't say that definitively.
But you think so?
No, I think it's possible. I don't know what I don't know.
And you were in there for quite a long time.
Yes.
With how many people would you say?
I don't know, 30, 40 maybe. I don't recall.
And it wasn't a real big room.
Right.
And there was no police officer that went into that room to tell you all, do not speak about this case amongst each other.
Not that I recall.
And there was no police officer that moved you into different corners of the room so that you all would not have access to each other.
Not that I recall.
If I may have 1 second, Chairman. believed that day, while Mr. Reeves was seated in his seat, and Mr. Oulson was yelling and moving in his direction, you believed that Mr. Reeves was in the most vulnerable position, correct?
Well, just to be clear, I didn't hear any yelling, but I recall this question from previously when you asked me, and it led to him being in a vulnerable position because he was seated.
Yeah.
Yes, if you're having someone over you, then yes, that's a vulnerable position.
I don't have any further questions.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. On several different occasions, the fence kept going back to a single word description, and the single word description was dark, and the single word description was loud. So instead of focusing on the single word, every time that you referred to dark, dim, dimmer, darkest, whatever the adjective was the lighting conditions sufficient enough for you to see in that theater?
Yes.
When we hear loud, okay, was it so loud that everything was deafening inside of this theater?
No.
And just for the sake of argument, we're hearing about different movies playing. So is there a break between different previews where it's not loud at all, actually?
Yes.
And you were asked to assume, and we probably both agree it's not a good idea to assume in court. Would that be a fair statement?
I would hope so.
Okay. And so you don't know for a fact that people were in fact discussing anything about what they may or may not have seen inside the theater?
I do not.
And you were asked about how many people were in the area. Did you hear people generally just talking?
I heard some talking, yes.
Okay, but you can't say specifically what they were talking about.
Chatter.
I'm gonna
System.
object this.
Could you hear what they were specifically talking about?
No.
Did you see or hear anyone get together and compare notes about what they observed in the theater?
No, sir.
Did you see or hear any people getting together to conspire to make up a story against the defendant here?
No, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Nothing else. Thank you.
Just 2 questions.
All right, we're not going to do that every time. The state called them, they get the last word.
So since you could see so well in there, the one thing that you can tell this jury that you're 100% certain of is that Mr. Oulson was standing the entire time.
Your Honor, I object. We've probably done this 5 or 6 times.
Sustained.
In fact, I stipulate that it was true based on the 5 or 6 times you said it.
May this witness be released?
We'll keep him on standby, Your
All
Honor.
right. Mr. Turner, you're free to go, but if you get a phone call asking you to come back, you'll have to come back, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Who's next?
You're on a statement called Derek Friedhoff.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you shall give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Rosenwasser.
All right, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
Can you please state your name and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Yes, my name is Derek Friedhoff. My first name is D-E-R-E-K, and last name is Friedhoff, F-R-I-E-D-H-O-F-F.
All right, and can you turn to the members of the jury and tell them what you do for a living?
Hi, I'm a registered nurse. I work with Advent Health.
Okay. Okay. And back on January 13th of 2014, were you a registered nurse at that time?
I was.
And were you working at the same location or different location?
At that time, it was a different location.
All right. On that particular date, did you go to see the movie Lone Survivor at the Cop Theater?
I did.
And do you recall just approximately what time it was that was starting?
I believe it started approximately around 1:20.
Okay. And who did you go to the theater with?
My girlfriend at the time.
All right. When you arrived at the theater, did you purchase tickets?
Say that again?
Did you purchase tickets?
Yes, we did.
Do you remember if you went to the concession area or not?
We did not go to the concession. We went straight to the movie theater.
All right. Do you recall where it was that you sat in the movie theater?
Yes.
At the time that you were sitting down, do you recall what the lighting conditions were like?
It was dim, but you can still see where you were walking or where you were going.
Did you have any concern when you walked into the theater that you could not see where your seat would be?
No concern.
Did you have any concern that you would trip and stumble and fall on people because it was too dark?
Nothing of that sort.
When you walked into the theater, could you see the rows clearly?
Yes.
Could you see people in the seats?
Yes.
Could you see the aisles?
Yes.
Was it dark like it is when the movie starts playing?
No.
All right. Did there come a point in time when you became aware that there was a shooting in the theater?
Yes.
And did you later learn the name of the person that did the shooting?
I did.
And what was that person's name?
The name of the shooter was Curtis Reeves.
All right. Did you learn the name of the person that was shot?
Yes.
And what was the name of that person?
Chad Oulson.
All right. Did you know either of them?
I did not.
All right. So we'll just refer to them by name so when we talk about it in the positioning of the theater, it'd be easier. Let me ask you this. Do you remember what row it was that the defendant Curtis Reeves was sitting in?
Yes, I believe he was sitting in the farthest row, the very far back one.
Okay, so the last row.
Yes.
Where was Mr. Oulson sitting in relation to where the defendant was sitting?
He was sitting in the row in front of him.
Okay. Where were you seated with respect to Mr. Oulson?
In respect to Mr. Oulson, I was one row ahead to the left. So if I'm Mr. Oulson sitting in this chair, I'd be one row ahead towards the left.
Okay, and then said another way, I know it's going to sound silly, is that if you looked over your back right shoulder, you would be seeing the Oulsons.
That's correct.
All right. Was Chad Oulson with somebody?
He was.
Okay, do you know who that person was?
Yes.
Who was that?
Nicole Oulson.
Okay, and you learned about her later on, meaning you learned her name later on?
That's correct.
You didn't know her part.
I had no idea until afterwards.
With respect to the time that you sat down, do you remember if the Oulsons were there first?
I didn't notice them or anyone till later on.
All right. Did there come a point in time when your attention was focused somewhere in the theater?
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about the lighting at that time. Is the lighting the same as what you were describing before?
Yes.
All right. And what about the volume in the theater at that time?
It varied. It depended on what was either on the previews or if there was no previews at the time. Like if it was in transition, there was nothing coming out of speakers. So it varied depending on what was on the screen.
Okay. Did you have any difficulty hearing the person you were with?
The person I was with, no.
All right. Could you hear other chatter within the theater even though the previews were playing?
Yes.
Could you specifically hear what other people were saying?
Unless I focused on it, not really.
All right. So the reason you couldn't hear it was because you weren't paying attention to them because you really had no reason.
Right.
Sustained.
What was the reason? Thank you. What was the reason that you couldn't specifically hear what people were saying?
I wasn't interested.
All right. What first brought your attention to someplace in the theater?
I heard some bickering coming from behind me on my right side.
Okay. And would that be the area where the Oulsons were?
Yes.
Okay. And would that be the same general area where the defendant was?
Yes.
All right. When you say bickering, how many voices did you hear?
I heard two.
Once you heard that bickering, what did you do next?
It kept my focus on that area because it just seemed out of the norm. And then until it went away, I went back looking at the screen.
Okay. So when you looked over, tell the jury what it is that you saw.
So when I initially looked over, I saw, is it okay if I visually show?
Sure.
I saw Chad Oulson, his body was facing the screen, or he had a cell phone out. I saw the screen illuminated, and it looked like he was talking to someone behind him.
Okay, so the way you're positioned was his body at that time, other than his head, facing the screen?
Right.
Could you hear what was being said?
I could hear them talking, but I couldn't hear exactly what was being said.
After you heard the talking, what's the next thing that you remember seeing?
So the next thing I saw was someone leaving from the top row, going down the staircase towards somewhere, and then once I saw that, the bickering stopped, and then I just started watching the previews again.
Okay, so once you saw someone leave, it was quiet again.
Correct.
Did you see that person come back?
I did not.
Did something bring your attention to that area again?
Yes.
And what was that?
It was the bickering resumed. It
All right.
continued again.
And did it sound like the same voices from before?
Yes.
Did it sound like the voice of one person or two people?
Two people.
Could you tell if they were male or female?
I could tell they were male.
Both of them?
Yes.
And prior to that, when one person had left, it was quiet.
That's correct.
When you heard this bickering again, what did you do?
So it caught my attention, so I continued to look over in that area again, where the bickering was coming from.
Okay, and what'd you see?
So at that point, I saw the outline of a person stand up and then say something along the lines of texting my daughter. There were some other words where I really couldn't understand what was said, but it was like an annoyed voice, like texting my daughter.
Okay, and who was that person?
That was Chad Oulson.
And were you looking over in that area then at that time?
I was.
And then what'd you see happen next?
So almost immediately after that, I heard something, it's like something being crumpled, and then I saw like movement of something being like something, camera acted out, okay?
Sure.
I saw someone stand up, say something, text my daughter, and then like they reached to grab something and then thrown.
Okay.
So it was something being crumpled. I didn't know what it was at the time.
Okay, and then what happened right after that?
Immediately after that, I heard someone say something along the lines like it's like it was mumbled, like they were mumbling. It said something like "show you," followed by like throw popcorn at my face. It was like more like declaratory, like out of anger.
Okay, and was it the same voice that mumbled and said throw popcorn?
Yes,
All right, so it was, the mumbled part was from the same person that said throw popcorn in my face.
that's correct.
At any time prior to the movement that you indicated, and you heard the crumbling,
Correct.
did you hear anything that sounded like a life or death struggle happening?
I did not.
Did you hear anything that would lead you to believe that the defendant here was being violently attacked?
I did not.
Did you hear anything from anyone yelling words, and it's going to sound silly, like, ow, oh my God, this is terrible, anything that would give you the impression that something is going on?
I did not hear anything of that sort.
Okay. Did you hear anything physical, like if someone were to try to jump over a seat in a theater and the seats would pop up? Did you hear anything like that going on?
Nothing of that sort.
Did you ever get the impression prior to the crumpled sound that you heard that there was a struggle happening?
Other than that, no.
Did you ever see Mr. Oulson throwing an object, a cell phone, anything at all prior to...
Nothing. I only saw that one movement of something being thrown, the initial.
Okay. And that was the crumpling.
The crumpling, yes, sir.
Did you hear the sound of the gunshot?
I did.
All right. And what did you see after that?
So once I saw the actual gunshot. I saw the muzzle flash and I heard the gunshot. My initial was focused on that area, and then I looked away to see like where the exits were in case there was a continuous shooting. So I looked away, see where the exits were at, looked over, and then I saw someone collapse.
Okay. What'd you do when you saw that?
I waited a couple more seconds because I wasn't for sure if someone was going to continue firing. And then once I felt like it was safe to go, I went to go assess whoever was shot.
Okay, and then who did it end up being that you were assessing?
Chad Oulson.
So tell the members of the jury what it is that you saw when you walked over there.
So my initial reaction was, of course, I want to make sure it was safe before I went over to check on Chad. So once I saw that there was no more shooting and that there was no more any type of violence occurring, I went to Chad's side. It was still a little bit dim. I saw blood coming from his shirt, and then at that point I called 911.
Did you lift up his shirt or look at him?
I did, yes. So I initially looked for an exit wound. I didn't see one. I just saw the initial entry wound. And then once I saw blood starting to pool, I lifted his shirt up, took my shirt off to apply pressure.
Okay. Did you do anything else to try to help Mr. Oulson at that time?
At that point, I was on the phone with 911, speaking with the operator, and I was trying to assess Chad's condition while at the same time speak with the 911 operator.
Okay. And what were you seeing from Chad?
So at that particular moment, Chad was still breathing. He had some like involuntary movement, and it sounded like he was trying to breathe. And at that point, I was just trying to keep an eye on him, make sure he, wouldn't go into either shock or get worse. So we're just holding pressure while I'm on phone with 911. And as the 911 call progressed, I noticed that Chad's pulse started to decline, and I could no longer feel a palpable pulse on his wrist. So where I was at, I wasn't in a spot where I could do CPR properly. So there was someone at, I believe, at his feet, and I asked if anyone could do chest compressions while I was on the phone with 911.
So there are other people that were helping you?
There were the people that were helping me, yes.
Was there a point in time when deputies from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene?
Yeah, about 15 or so minutes later.
Okay. And were you still in the theater when they came in?
Yes.
Was there a point in time when you were given a piece of paper that some people call a written statement to fill out?
Yes.
Did they give you any instructions about how to fill that out?
They just said just fill it out. There was no clear, concise way to fill it out. They just said just fill out what you saw, and that was pretty much it.
Okay. And did you assume that at some point you talked to a detective or a
Yes.
deputy? Did you in fact talk to a detective or a deputy?
I did, yes.
When you were in the theater, did you talk to anyone other than law enforcement about what you observed?
No, I did not.
Did you get together with anyone to conspire to make up a story?
No, I did not.
Are you testifying to what you personally observed
Yes.
and what you personally heard?
Yes.
Did you ever hear anyone yelling, no, 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 or whoa, whoa, whoa?
Nothing of that sort, no.
We have a moment, Your Honor.
You-
computer, was the only thing that you heard Mr. Oulson say was something about texting his daughter?
That's correct. That's the only audible thing that I heard.
Okay.
Like I said, he was talking prior, but I could not understand what was said.
Okay, so you didn't hear any loud threats towards anybody else?
I did not.
I don't have any further questions.
Go ahead, Mr. Michaels.
All right, at the time, January 2014, January 13th, you were a registered nurse,
That's correct.
and you worked in trauma at the time, right?
That particular time, no, I was doing neurology and orthopedics.
You worked trauma previously, right?
Previously, yes, that's correct.
And you're pretty exact because you actually purchased your ticket at 1:16 p.m. that day, right?
That's correct.
And you actually entered the theater, you remember, at 1:19 p.m., right?
Yes, because I looked at my cell phone prior to getting to the movie theater.
Okay. And so what happens is when you get in there, you describe where you sat, and your then girlfriend, Jenny Monero, was sitting next to you,
That's correct.
and she was to your right.
I believe she was to my right.
And so when you're looking back at where Mr. Oulson and Mr. Reeves are, and Mrs. Reeves and Mrs. Oulson, you have to lean back in your seat, right?
Yes, the seat reclines a little bit at the movie theater, so I was able to look past behind her head and see what was going on behind me.
All right. So you answered my question. I was going to ask if you have to look behind your girlfriend's head to look back up, right?
That's correct.
Now, what you heard that was audible to you was loud enough to be concerning to you, correct?
It caught my attention.
Okay, and it was concerning to you,
It seemed out of the norm, so it caught my attention.
okay? So are you telling me that I'm mischaracterizing what you thought? You don't think it was concerning at the time?
It caught my attention. Like, it just sounded like two people, like, bickering and arguing. Like, it just seemed, like, out of place.
I'm asking you a direct question.
Objection, asked and answered.
Okay, page 2477, line 23. I'm sorry, 2427. Lines 20. It's like line 23. Okay. This was a hearing back in 2017 that you were present for and testified in. Remember that?
I recall being here at some point in the past. I don't
Okay,
remember
the same
exact date.
courtroom,
Okay.
right?
I don't know if it's the same courtroom. I really don't know which, if it was A, B, C, or D.
You remember testifying
I remember
regarding this
testifying
case?
at some point in the past.
Okay. You remember it 2017?
I remember the year. I don't remember what date I was here.
Okay, that's fine. So you remember in 2017.
Okay.
There's a court hearing like this where you faced the clerk and raised your hand to tell the truth. You remember that?
I'm probably sure I had to.
Okay, well, you remember that you walked into the movie theater at 1:16 that day. Well,
I didn't walk in the movie theater at 1:16.
I'll overrule.
you bought your ticket at
I
1:16.
bought the ticket at 1:16.
And so that's even more accurate. So is there a reason why you remember when you bought your ticket, but you don't remember whether you faced the clerk and swore to tell the truth in 2017 in this courtroom?
Because I still had the movie stub, the movie ticket stub.
How do you remember that you walked to the theater at 1:19? Does
Because
that
I-
somehow indicate on the movie stub?
Because I looked at my phone prior to going to the movie theater. I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss the previews.
Did you look at your calendar before the hearing in 2017 and know what date it was?
No,
And so you're saying that you don't remember whether you took an oath to tell the truth or not that day?
I said I recall, I just don't remember what the date of taking the oath was.
Okay, so now, because I asked you before, so let me just ask you the question again. Do you remember facing the clerk, raising your hand, and swearing to tell the truth?
Yes.
Okay. The context is, I'll start at line 1. Question, when you first heard the bickering, could you hear what was being said? Answer, line 3, most of it was inaudible, but at one point,
Your Honor, I would object. You're going beyond what your question was. I think your question is 20 to 23, or 20 to 25.
I'll be happy to go to that section. If I'm asked to put it in context, then I'll do that, Your Honor. It's not a problem. Page 2427, line 20, question, and that's at the hearing. And you indicated that you were kind of leaning back in your chair and looking to your right. Answer, that's correct. It was loud enough to raise to be concerning to me. Right, so you were concerned.
Concern. I would agree.
And that's when you saw the light of the cell phone.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
And you showed the prosecutor, you kind of gave an example where you were holding, you showed in your right hand a cell phone.
That's correct.
So do you know whether it was in Mr. Oulson's right hand, or you just,
So when I saw the cell phone,
Right.
it was kind of like just hovering. So I just saw like just a cell phone illumination, and I just saw Chad talking to someone behind him.
the question is, you held up your right hand because you wanted to do a physical demonstration for the court, or whomever. You held up your right hand. So is your testimony it was in his right hand, or do you not know for
I
certain?
believe it was in his right hand because I saw the cell phone screen. So it'd be kind of hard if it was in his left hand for me to see that illumination.
Okay. Did you see it in his hand physically?
I saw his cell phone. It's not going to float magically, so someone would have to be holding it.
Okay. So did you see my question
I
is
saw the
again,
cell phone.
Mr. Friedhoff, listen. We need to be able to allow me, number one, to finish asking my question
Okay.
before you answer. This lady here takes down every word on that machine. She cannot take it down if we're both talking, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. And so, my question is, did you physically see it in his hand?
Yes.
Okay. And did you physically see it in his right hand?
Yes.
Okay. And that's your sworn testimony?
That's my sworn testimony.
Now, during the second preview is when you heard that second part of the bickering with the texting my daughter sort of thing, right?
That's correct.
The second preview was, I think, sabotage. Do you recall that?
That's correct.
Oh. And that's when you described this whole, you heard the crumpling of something, right?
At some point, I heard the crumpling, yes, but it may not have been during that exact preview. I just
Okay.
remember the second bickering occurred during the second preview. It didn't last the entire, or it wasn't like from the start to the beginning of the second preview. It occurred during the second preview.
Okay. My question was to you, did that occur during the second preview?
I want to say it was towards the end of it.
Okay. The question, listen closely to the question. I'm not asking you when or in what part of the preview. I'm asking you, did that crumpling that you described happen during the preview?
I believe it was after the preview. The bickering occurred during the preview.
The crumpling that you heard, I'm talking about the
The
crumpling,
crumpling itself, okay.
happened during the preview.
It happened after the preview,
After the first preview?
after the second preview.
So the second preview is over, right?
Correct.
Then you heard the crumpling.
That's correct.
Now, when you look back in the row, what you see is you can't actually make out Mr. Oulson, but you see a silhouette, right?
I see a person standing, but I can't make out what they were wearing.
It appears to be a silhouette to you.
More of a silhouette, that's correct, an outline.
And then what you see is you see somebody going forward with full momentum.
They were reaching for something. It looked like they went to go grab something, and then I saw the motion of something being thrown back.
And when it gets thrown back, you see the person at full momentum.
They were just not, when I say full, I say their arm at full momentum. I don't see their full body at full momentum. I just see something being thrown.
The arm is at full momentum.
Yes, they were throwing something.
Okay, let me ask you the question again.
Well, Your Honor, I object. He answered exactly what he was being asked.
The question is, it's a yes or no question.
Well, I'd object. If the witness needs to explain, I'd ask you to have the ability to explain.
Sustained, move on.
Your Honor, cross-examination, I can call for a yes or no answer. I disagree with the prosecutor.
I would object.
So describe then how you saw the popcorn being thrown?
I saw the person standing, looked like they reached over to grab something. I heard something being crumpled, and then it was this forward motion of something being thrown back at them.
And do you have any other description of how that was done?
As far as they stood up, I heard texting my daughter, and at that point, I saw someone reach over, heard something being crumpled, and then saw movement of something being thrown back at them.
Okay. Page 2451, line 20. Same hearing, question. Then the third thing that you observed is a movement or a motion of something being thrown. Answer, your answer. Full forward momentum.
Okay.
Well,
That's your answer?
well, here's my objection. I would ask that you read.
Your Honor, if he's gonna do a speaking objection, we're gonna have,
Okay.
Well, let's go.
I don't know what the legal objection is at this point.
The rule of completeness, read the entire sentence.
You want to come up?
I want to make sure I read your entire answer, okay? So let me ask the question again. I'll read you the question. You're under oath. You're in sworn testimony during a hearing. Question. Then the third thing that you observed is a movement or a motion of something being thrown. Answer. Full forward momentum. I couldn't see what was thrown, but I saw movement of something of like an arm reaching out and then heard something impact, right? So the full forward momentum that you're talking about, right, is when the arm is going back.
I didn't see a pitch.
So what's full forward momentum?
Full forward momentum is you just see something moving forward,
Well, why is it full forward momentum?
because it was full. It wasn't like it was done. It would look like someone reached over, grabbed, brought it back, and then thrown. That's forward, like it had intent to throw something.
Okay. And so full meaning what? Like, let's say it was, slow, no momentum, half momentum?
But maybe
full
no momentum would be like that. This was grabbed, brought back, thrown.
All right, so not a flick, in other words.
Not a flick.
All right, now let's talk about some of the things that happened afterwards. Now, before the shot rings out, you hear throw popcorn at me or something to that effect, before the shot.
Something along the lines of it sounds like it was mumbled. It was hard to understand, but it sounded like show you, throw popcorn at me. And the throw popcorn at me was more out of like, it was a raised voice, and it sounded like it was out of like anger,
Okay.
and annoyance.
And then the shot.
I believe the shot came as he was saying that.
Okay, so Mr. Oulson throws with full momentum. In this case, now we know it's popcorn. We didn't
Okay.
know what it was then. Into Mr. Reeves' face, right?
I didn't know where it landed on Mr. Reeves' face.
Okay. Towards Mr. Reeves. Teacher throw popcorn at me, then bang, right?
I heard show you, throw popcorn at me, and I believe he shot while he was saying that.
Okay,
So I
so-
heard show you, gunshot, then after that, throw popcorn at me.
All right, let me ask you this question. Is it, again, I need to know exact. This is a court of law.
Okay.
You're testifying as a witness. You've sworn to tell the truth. It's a truthful answer if you don't know the answer, or if you're not sure of the answer. You're telling me you're sure of the answer, so I want to know what the answer is.
Okay.
Did you hear the statement regarding I'll show you or to throw popcorn at me before the shot or not?
It was at the same time.
So it wasn't before the shot?
It was maybe a second difference. One, it was so close in time as far as when it was said and when the act occurred. It's really hard to recall exactly. It was maybe a half a second or a second within each other.
Okay, I'm concerned because I'm a lawyer, and so I don't want it to seem like I'm picking on you.
Okay.
But my concern is I'm asking you a question and I'm not getting an answer.
Your
I
Honor,
want to
think
know,
He gave the best answer he possibly could.
okay, bond hearing. Page 38, lines lines 16 through 23. I'm sorry, that's 383, lines 16 through 23. That's one of them. Let's start at 383, that's fine. 383, lines 16 through 23. You remember the bond hearing? That was February, about a month after you were at the theater that day. You remember coming to court then, soon after that?
That was at the office upstairs, correct?
No, that was a bond hearing, again in court,
Okay.
right after that, within weeks.
Okay. I don't really recall the time, but I remember coming in for something along those lines, yes.
Well, do you remember having a court hearing with a judge and everything?
Is this the same one before as the one you described? Like coming in to testify? Is that the?
Yes, yes, approach.
Here's another question and answer under oath at any rate, okay? All right?
Okay.
Question. The one statement that you attribute to Mr. Reeves that you indicated it was something like throw popcorn on my face was after the shot or before the shot? Answer, before the shot. Question, so before the shot, you hear him say, throw popcorn in my face and then the shot? That's correct, right? You remember saying that?
I remember saying something along those lines. That's correct.
Those exact words.
If that's what the statement says, that's probably what I said.
All right, let's talk a little bit about what happened in the theater that day. Now, after, first of all, after the shot rings out, you eventually make your way towards where Mr. Oulson is.
That's correct.
When you get there, there's already a gentleman that's applying compression to Mr. Oulson's chest, right?
It was dim, as far as I couldn't exactly see what he was doing, but there was someone at his side.
Okay,
I think he was applying pressure over his shirt, but I don't, because his shirt wasn't up.
okay, well, you don't remember exactly what was happening, right?
I just remember someone being at his side.
Pardon me?
I just remember someone being at Mr. Oulson's side.
Did you see somebody actually putting their hands on Mr. Oulson's chest?
I can't recall.
All right. If I show you something, would it help you refresh your recollection?
Sure.
Okay, deposition, page 60, line 25. May I approach?
You-
All right. All right, Mr. Friedhoff, if you would, this will help you refresh your recollection. You can sit down, please.
Okay.
Start at line 18 and work your way through the next page, please, okay?
Just
Okay,
read
read the
it.
whole page or?
To yourself.
To yourself.
Okay.
Let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
All right? May I just...
Yeah.
So now you're able to look at that deposition. You remember now there was somebody else there attending to Mr. Oulson, right?
Yes, after reading that, I agree with that.
A gentleman in his 30s.
I think maybe 30s, 40s. He was older than me.
Okay. And at the time you were 20-something?
I was 23 or 24.
All right. And that gentleman, did you know that that was Matthew Reeves, Curtis Reeves' son?
I did not.
At any rate, you took over from him, is that right?
That's correct. The chest compressions that he was doing didn't seem adequate.
All right. And so what happens next after you're finished with that, at some point, police take you to a room and swab you for DNA and kind of process you a little bit and have you clean up, right?
Yes, I believe it was the activities room near the concession stand.
Okay? And I know you talked to the prosecutor about giving a statement, but what happens in between is that you are actually taken with a group of other people, or at least directed to an area down by the front of the theater where the movie screen is.
Yes, I recall I don't know if it was a detective or a police officer. They told us to wait in an area here and don't talk. I remember they said, don't talk about what you saw, but you can just hang out in this area.
Okay, and they may have said that, but the truth is that you actually heard people talking to each other about what happened.
I heard someone say out loud said something like they were brave about the people who went in to help. But other than that, I can't recall anything that was said other than that.
Okay, let's talk about that. So when you got there, they were talking to you and your girlfriend, Jenny Monero, at the time, and they were saying, you're brave, you're a hero.
We were away from the group. I remember seeing maybe about 6 people in the group, and then there were other couples that were kind of to themselves away.
Okay, and so your testimony today is that you don't remember whether other people were talking or exchanging views about what happened.
I can't recall what they were saying.
The question again, we'll get to that second part. The question is, do you recall people, as you were in that group, waiting for police to interview you, do you recall people exchanging views of what happened?
No, I do not.
Let me show you your deposition. Maybe that will refresh your recollection. You think that sworn testimony would help you?
Sure, visually would help.
Okay. Page 71, I'm going to direct you to lines 9 through 13.
Said 9 through 13?
Yes, sir. 9 through 13. Let me know when you finish reading it.
Okay.
So you will agree with me that people in that group were exchanging views about what had happened, right?
What I heard from the group initially was they said that the nurses were brave about what happened, and that was it. I don't know anything else other than that. I didn't hear what else was said.
Okay, you read your own testimony,
I did.
so now you remember?
I saw what I said, but I don't know what else was said other than that. So.
Then what?
Other than those nurses were brave.
Okay, so when you say that they were exchanging their views about what happened, you were talking there about nurses being brave, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And nothing else?
I can't recall anything else that was said other than that.
All right. Well, if you can't recall, let me try to refresh your recollection again. Same deposition, page 71. This time go to lines 1 through 5.
Okay.
So now you remember that you heard people talking about what they observed, right?
I recall, other than that the paper that you provided for me, the only thing I recall was talking about the nurses being brave.
Okay.
I don't recall that part of the conversation, but if it's documented, it's documented.
All right. You deny it?
I'm not denying it.
So you agree that what you said was
Your Honor,
that,
I object. He's already asked and answered this.
okay? And you, Judge, I'm asking, we're talking about what he said.
Go ahead.
What you said is that the people were talking, and what they said was, I think it was over popcorn, something like that, right?
Okay.
Did you say that?
If that's what's written down, it's what I said. I don't recall saying that. I mean, I can't remember saying that, but if it's written down, it's written down. I must have said it,
You remember walking into the theater at 119?
because I looked at my
I
phone.
object. This is an asked and answered.
Sustained.
You don't remember giving that sworn statement because it's different?
I didn't say it, I just don't recall exactly everything that I said.
So then to say that the only thing people talked about was that you were a hero is not true. You don't recall everything, right?
That's right, that's from today's perspective. The only thing that I recall, what you asked, is about the nurses being brave. That's all I remember.
And then now that you see your statement, now you can see there were other things as well.
Sustained.
All right, let's talk about something else. Now, once you're there in that group, people are obviously talking about what happens. You hear the word popcorn, you give a statement to police after that, right?
Okay?
Right?
It didn't, whatever was said, it didn't change my views, because I heard and I saw what I experienced.
You gave a statement after that, that's the question.
Yes.
And then, when you're walking out of the theater, you and Miss Monero, one of the detectives introduces you to Sheriff Naco, right?
Okay, I believe so.
Okay. Well, you remember that.
I remember meeting police officers. I don't know, I can't recall what Sheriff Naka looks like.
You remember shaking his hand and introducing himself?
I've met several police officers that day. I really don't recall.
Okay, so you don't recall whether is what you're telling us, you don't?
Yes, I spoke with several police, law enforcement. I can't recall who I saw and spoke with.
All right, do you recall this then? Sometime after that, you get a communication from the sheriff's office. They want you to come to receive a plaque for heroism.
Okay, I remember that.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you received the plaque, right?
Okay,
Well, did you receive the plaque?
I did.
And the plaque says something to the effect of, for your brave, quick thinking in aid of another person in the event of a life-threatening situation, right?
I believe that's what the plaque says.
And I imagine when you made the acceptance speech, you said, I don't deserve this. There was somebody there before me. Did you tell them that?
I don't recall saying that there was someone there before me. I was just saying that I was just doing my job.
Did you tell anybody that there was somebody there before you helping this man?
I can't recall that.
And so now you receive a plaque from the sheriff's office, so really you're kind of beholding to the sheriff's office and state attorney's office, aren't you?
Can you rephrase that, please?
Not understand the question?
No, I'm just trying to say what you're trying to get at.
I don't have any other questions, Judge.
Thank you. Redirect?
Yes. When Mr. Oulson fell to the ground, or let me rephrase that, where were you working on Mr. Oulson?
So when I initially went over to Mr. Oulson, I was at his head side. Sorry, I was at the top near his head.
Okay, and where was that located? Where was Mr. Oulson's head?
Mr. Oulson, if the aisle, if the stairway is to the right, his head was towards the middle, like pointed towards the middle part of the aisle.
Was he on the ground?
He was on the ground,
Completely on the ground?
completely on the ground.
Okay, because during cross you mentioned that it was dim. Was that because he was on the ground?
I just think it was just the lighting conditions.
Because he was on the ground?
He was on the ground, yes. Because at that time, I don't think the full house lights were up yet.
I think you answered this on cross, but when you made the statement either before or simultaneously with the shot about throwing popcorn on the face, are you, because I think this might have been the question on cross, are you making that up because you received the plaque for helping save Chad Oulson's life?
No.
Well, that was what he implied.
Overall.
Were you making up about the popcorn
I did not
because
make
you
that
saved
up.
Chad Oulson's life?
I did not make that up.
Or trying to?
I heard those exact words, throw popcorn at me.
Okay, and then you were asked whether or not you were aware that someone else was doing CPR. Do you remember that question?
Yes, because I remember when I was on call with 911, someone was doing, I asked someone to do chest compressions.
Okay, here's what I'm asking you. Was it important to you to look around and see how many people are helping you and maybe get their name? Or was it more important to help save Chad Oulson's life?
It was more important to save Chad Oulson's life.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
I'll be keeping my standby.
Okay. Mr. Friedhoff, you're free to go, but if you get a call and they want you back, you'll have to come back, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay. You may. We'll be taking a break before we get into anything lengthy, so don't worry.
time the state would rest.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rosenwasser. Ladies and actually, okay. I was gonna let you go take a recess, but I think we'll, the attorneys and myself will have some work to do following the rest by the state, so good time to let you go, correct, for the day? That's what we talked about? Okay. All right, so I know it's early for you guys, but it really is the best use of your time to just let you go on your own time, because the lawyer, like I said, the lawyers and myself have some stuff that it's going to take a while that we have to talk about, and no sense having you hang around for that. So let's be back at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is Friday. Whew. All right. Just be back at 8:30. Remember my instructions during the recess. And thank you for your patience this week thus far, and we'll see you in the morning. Enjoy a little bit of afternoon off. Any questions? Okay, thank you. I think the weather's nice out there. You guys, I guess I keep forgetting, come a little early to do your stuff with the clerk. Thanks. Thank you, Deputy. All right, be seated.
So if we could maybe have 15 minutes ourselves.
Sure,
to get our
it's-
arguments and everything, maybe 20 minutes to get our arguments in line.
That's fine. Come back at, say, 10 till? That'd be good, or?
That'd be perfect.
Okay. All right, we'll be in recess till 10 till.